Well, good morning, everybody. How many are glad you came to church today, right? Here we go. This is good. I love it. So much fun. You know, we live in a culture that loves to celebrate on today. And one of the things we want to make sure is we understand that the best thing to celebrate is what Jesus does in our lives, right? That is the best thing for us to celebrate. Because we know that this is really an excuse for a party day. That's all it is. Hey, how many Chief fans do we got in the building? We got a few. All right, Midwest represent. How many 49er fans do we got in the building? Okay, got a couple. How many don't care whatsoever? How many are just really glad you have an excuse to eat a lot of guacamole or food? Like it's just food in general. Right, this is just the food day. It's a cheat day. Calories don't count, right? That's just how this works today. And that's kind of the concept. You know, I think the reason, though, that as a culture and as a people, we love sports and we resonate with sports and the activities of Super Sundays and things like this is because it kind of lives out this metaphor for life, right? There's this competition factor of living that we resonate with. If you think back to Super Bowl 51, Super Bowl 51 was the New England Patriots versus the Atlanta Falcons, and it really looked like the Falcons were going to run away with this game. 8 minutes left in the third quarter. They are up 28-3. 28-3. And finally, the Patriots get back they get on the board. But even at the beginning of the fourth quarter, it's just 28-9. They manage another field goal with less than 6 minutes left in the game. It's still just 28-12 at that point. It looks like the game is over. Looks like everything's kind of finished. But as things keep progressing, all of a sudden the Patriots get a strip sack and they get the ball back and they have a short field. They go, they score, they get the 2-point conversion. And with under 1 minute left in the game, Tom Brady takes the New England Patriots down the field, and James White from the University of Wisconsin, baby, all right, takes the ball into, hey, this is my time, I get to do it. All right, so takes the ball into the end zone. They convert the 2-point conversion afterwards, and now all of a sudden it's overtime. Overtime, the Patriots get the ball. The ball's in Tom Brady's hands. They go down the field, they score, and they win. As they're looking at taking clips of all the players when it comes to overtime, all you can hear on the sidelines from different players going, we got this. Tom Brady, he's amazing. He's like the most remarkable. What is it about him that makes him so good? And just so many interviews with people like, what was it that a player like that, who's up against the ropes, who's down but doesn't consider himself out? And they talked to his coach, and the coach said, you know, Tom's not the best athlete he's ever coached. In fact, he's far from the best athlete he's ever coached, far from the best athlete on the team. But there are 3 things that set Tom apart as an athlete more than any other player. So number 1, he's got an incredibly strong work ethic, incredibly dedicated. Number 2, he is a quick strategic thinker. He knows the strategy and he makes decisions very quickly. And the third thing is that he lives in the moment, meaning he stays focused on short-term goals. He doesn't get caught up in what happened in the past. He doesn't get caught up in what's about to happen. He stays focused on these short-term goals. And it's that focus that allows him to be one of the great comeback players of all time. When we talk about being a comeback, or even we've watched the people that have watched football, the Chiefs, the last couple of weeks, several big comebacks. And there's something about that comeback moment that we resonate with, or we connect with, because all of us face difficult circumstances. All of us have been in a time where we've felt like maybe the time was running out on us. Maybe the pressure's been a little bit more than we thought that we could handle. And when we face those circumstances, we have a couple different ways that we can approach them, don't we? For a lot of us, we kind of feel like we're those popsicle stick houses, you know, you build when you're a little kid, and you put them up and the pressure comes, what happens to them? They just flatten. And you got to rebuild the whole thing. There's others of us, we kind of face those difficult moments like a brick. We're hard and we're rigid and we're just going to take it on. But what happens when the moment is difficult and it chips something off of you? It breaks a piece off of you. And then you're not sure how to repair that, how to restore that. Or some of us, we face difficult circumstances. We're so pliable that we just kind of blend in. We have no backbone, so to speak, and we just slip through the cracks and hope nobody notices and nothing really significantly changes. But to really overcome adversity, we need to have something that when they're describing Tom Brady and other athletes that have this kind of come from behind mentality, it's this concept called resiliency. To be resilient is probably one of the most helpful things to have in life. Resilient means the ability of an object to return to form after it's been bent, stretched, or compressed. right? Kind of like a stress ball, right? You put stress on it, you put pressure on it, it bounces back to the shape that it's in, as opposed to silly putty, right? You squish it and it just kind of stays in that shape, or you just take, a piece of paper, you crumble it, or you take a brick and it doesn't move. Have the capacity when pressure is placed on you, that you have the ability to bounce back. And all of us need that, because let's be very real. Life is not short when it comes to difficult circumstances. Life is full of difficult circumstances. As part of my role, one of the things that we walk with people through grief all the time. And grief is a really difficult thing, because grief isn't something you just get over, because there's a part of your life, a very important part of your life, that has died, that no longer is there. It's no longer present in your life, and it's gone. And how do you bounce back to who you're supposed to be as you go through that? Or maybe we have people that have dealt with trauma. And trauma happens when something unexpected hits you and comes alongside of you, and a part of you is broken. It caught you so off guard that a part of you is now broken. You're just not the same that you used to be. Or maybe you have hardships that just continually come, kind of like waves when they hit the rocks, right, over and over again, where eventually it just wears you out, just wears you down. You're just tired of it. Like, really, I'd love to have a break once in a while. This is even just personally, I was thinking of this last year. As I wrapped up my dissertation, I looked at a lot of these things, and then I started noticing, man, I'm just not bouncing back as quick as I used to be. And then I found there is such a thing. It's called post-dissertation disorder, right? It's just like post-dissertation, like there was enough people that after they finished their dissertation just kind of went blah with life and had a hard time showing that somebody studied it and looked at it. And we all have those. We all have these moments that hit us, that pressure us, and we have something inside of us that longs to bounce back. But I want to talk to you today about the reason you have a longing to bounce back. The reason you long for that overcoming, comeback kind of story is because God created you for that. God created you with the capacity to come back. This is a God-given plan for your life. That no matter what circumstances you face, that you will not be bent, you will not be broken, you will not be overwhelmed. Well, Paul is writing to a group of people in Corinth. He put these words together. He says, we are pressed on every side by troubles, but we are not crushed. We are perplexed, but not driven to despair. We are hunted down, but never abandoned by God. We get knocked down, but we are not destroyed. Do you realize that God's plan for your life is that no matter what pressure you face, is to bounce back, to be resilient, to have the capacity to come back into who he created you to be, what he has a plan for you, how to shape you, and to stay strong in the midst of a broken world. He knows that the world around us is broken. He knows that we're going to face hardships and significant things. So I want to just put that passage into really plain English for you today. What Paul is saying is just very simply this. He's saying first, he's just saying your circumstances do not define you. Your circumstances do not define you. He says you're pressed on every side, but you're not crushed. You need to understand, problems are guaranteed in your life. If you don't think this next week's going to have some hard moments in your life, well, let's talk, because it's going to. You're going to have some hard moments this week. It's a guarantee for that. But the circumstances of your life do not define you. And think of it for a second. If somebody's you've walked through cancer. I know we have many in this room that are walking through cancer. How easy is it for so many of us to now define that person by their illness? To start talking to that person, and we don't talk about that person, who they are, we talk about the cancer, or we don't know how to talk about the cancer, and so we avoid talking with them, or you've gone through the difficulties of an illness, and all of a sudden now the illness defines you as opposed to who you are. And you need to understand today the illness does not define the person. Right? In the same way, you go through divorce. Many of them have gone through divorce, and it's terrible and it's painful. And how many people I've worked with over the years that now the divorce now defines them. That I'm not going to be loved, that I'm not going to be cared for, that what happened here in this part of my past, I'm always going to be a divorced person, that is my definition of me. And God's saying, no, your circumstances don't define you. Maybe you've been fired from a job. You've been let go. You were working something and jobs changed. And all of a sudden now you don't know how to define yourself outside of a new job or a new responsibility. Or you have a loved one that you lost, and we can maybe define ourselves as a widow or we want a widower, and we have a hard time understanding your circumstances of your life do not define you. There's a man in the Bible named Joseph. Joseph, when he was younger, when he was a young man, his brothers sold him into slavery. That is a bad day, okay? Right? Let's just be very real and blunt and honest. They sold him, and then after a while he ends up in prison for things that he didn't do. If anybody lived a life whose circumstances could have defined him, it was Joseph. Yet at the end of his life, when he worked his way back to a leadership position in the nation of Egypt, his brothers came to visit, and he says this to his brothers. He says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to the position so I could save the lives of many people." He understood that his definition of who he was not defined by his circumstances. It is God is the one who defines you. You need to understand that your purpose and your creation is greater than your circumstances. You need to get back up, become who you were created to be. And the second thing Paul's saying in this, he's saying emotions do not motivate you. And emotions cannot motivate you. He says we're perplexed, which basically he's saying you will be emotionally confused. I mean, you've had days where you're just emotionally confused, right? We're just we don't want to admit it. Most of us don't. We hide it. We're really good at it. But he says you're not driven to despair. It doesn't drive you to despair. Emotions are crazy because all of us have them. Even those people that I talk to, especially guys and very linear thinkers, go, "I don't have emotion." Like, no, you really do. They're just a little bit deeper. In fact, they probably impact you just a little bit deeper than you even think, right? Because all of us are impacted by emotions, and we have this emotional response. And the thing about emotions is they're real, but they're rarely true. In fact, emotions make terrible decision makers, and they're terrible drivers. It's kind of like giving the keys to a teenager for the first time, right? You're just kind of like, no, like when our boys were learning how to drive, the first place, like kind of out of our street, out of our neighborhood, was to jump onto a 6-lane highway. And I'm like, that is not how we're learning how to drive. We're going to take a little bit longer. We're going a different direction, right? Because they are not in that place to be a good driver. I was thinking, I had a friend years ago who was a highway patrolman, and highway patrolmen have great stories. And this one was just a simple one, but probably heard something similar. But he came up on a crash where an RV vehicle had gone off the road. And so as he pulls in, he starts to talk to the driver, and he's trying to figure, okay, so what happened? He goes, I don't know at all. I was driving down the road. I put the thing in cruise control. And I went back to take a nap for a little bit. And then all of a sudden I ended up here. Right? You're like there are some emotional decisions that are terrible decision makers, right? They're terrible drivers. They don't help us. We're not quite there with self-driving cars yet. And what we need to do is when we're feeling these things is to learn how to tell the truth to ourselves. I feel this, but the truth is I am powerful, I am loved, and I am in control. I might feel this, but there is a truth that God is speaking in this moment that is even deeper and more profound. When we work with those that are recovering from addictions and deep addictions, one of the things that we work on the most is trying to help people with what we kind of call opening the window from impulse to action. Most of us, when we have emotions, what we do is we feel something and we respond to it. Have you ever been in a meeting where somebody just kind of feels something, somebody says something that triggers a feeling and they just say it, right? Like we all do this. It's not just into addictions. But when we're working with people, it's how do you feel what you're feeling? And hit pause on reacting to it. And widen that window, widen that gap from what I feel to then make my decision based on what's true. Instead of making a decision based on what I feel in that moment, that I put that gap in between to help say, oh, okay, I feel this right now. I feel angry, but I'm not going to respond out of anger. I'm going to respond because I am powerful, I am loved, and I am in control. I might feel disappointed, but I'm not going to respond to my disappointment because I am powerful and loved and in control. And I'm going to respond in a way that I know truth is. And so what we're understanding here, what Paul's trying to get through to us, is that your emotions cannot motivate you. The third thing he says, very simply, is that loneliness does not isolate you. But when you feel lonely, it doesn't mean that you're isolated. It doesn't mean that you're all alone. He says you may be hunted down, but God will never abandon you. If we took a poll in here and said, how many of you have ever felt abandoned by people, we'd have 100% participation. All of us at one point or another have felt abandoned. That somebody has let us down, that somebody has hurt us. Because being abandoned by other people is incredibly painful. It's just not easy. It's a very difficult thing to go through. In fact, one of the things I studied several years ago was looking at how kids transition from high school into the next phase of life. And one of the things that we found just watching kids and studying students, is that when that the first 2 weeks of college, you tend to set all the patterns for your life. Those that go to college, within the first 2 weeks, they make all their decisions. And usually by the end of the second week, some of our Christian kids or kids that have faith or don't want to go into maybe a party mentality, they're so tired of being alone on Friday night. They're willing to go find other people just to be with. People that might not have the same values, might not have the same perspective. And how many of us understand that when we go through things, putting ourselves around other people who aren't the same shape of us isn't always the healthiest thing? To have people that are different, have different perspectives. In Isaiah, God is talking to his people through the prophet. He says this, he says, don't be afraid, for I am with you. Don't be discouraged, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will hold you up with my victorious right hand. I don't know if you're here this morning and you've ever sensed the presence of God. But the presence of God is something that's so powerful and so unique because it can be with us at any moment. I'm not a very feely, person. But I remember that when I've encountered God's presence, it changed me. There's something drastic. There was one particular time, I still can't get out of my mind. It was years ago. I was just feeling kind of isolated, feeling kind of defeated, kind of alone. And I ended up going for a walk out in just a county park. And in the middle of these trails, the presence of God was just so profound and so powerful. I've never felt more stable, more anchored, more full of hope in my life because I realized I was not alone. I wasn't alone. That there was somebody who was watching me, who was holding over me. And so Paul's telling us here, remember that you have these other things that are defining you. And ultimately, he finalizes that and he says, remember, failure does not finish you. Failure does not finish you. He says, you may be knocked down, but it is not over. We need to understand, my friends, that failure is not fatal. Just because we failed, just because we've tripped, just because we've been knocked down, doesn't mean that it's over. We need to learn how to get up and continue to move on. So many times I've seen people, well, this happened in my life, and now it's just, that part's just over. I can't move forward anymore. No, that's not how God has written our stories. Paul's talking to the people in Philippi, and he says in Philippians 1:6, I am certain that God, who began this good work within you, will continue his work until it is finally finished on the day when Christ Jesus returns. Friends, here's the truth. You only lose if you quit. You only lose if you quit. When it comes to it, Jesus, so many times we feel like, oh, it's the fourth quarter, it's over, it's done, I don't have enough time to get back up. Well, God's saying, no, you only lose if you quit. You've got God on your side. The time clock isn't in your hands. It's not in somebody else's hands. He's the one that controls that. He's the one that establishes it. He says in his scripture over and over again that mercies are new every morning. Hey, you can go to bed at night and feel messed up and frustrated and overwhelmed with all the failures and mistakes and difficult things that you've made. You can wake up the next morning, you know what? God's mercies are new. Everything's new. You get to start over with him because failure is not fatal. It does not define you. It is not the end of your story. You see, what we're talking about today is so much more than just a self-help talk. This isn't about self-help. This is about a deep transformation that only God can do in our lives. To truly be resilient, to truly bounce back when the pressure and the difficulties of life come. You have got to know what God is doing and what God is telling us ultimately. If you could boil everything down to just one specific thing, is that you must know who you are. When you are pressed, when you are overwhelmed, when you feel, when you fail, when you are difficult, the only way we bounce back into who we were meant to be is we have to know who we were created to be. Right? How else do you know the shape? When you get pressed, how else do you know what shape to get back to? Well, this is who I'm supposed to be because I know God created me this way for this purpose. I was thinking the story of Corrie ten Boom. Some of you might have heard that name. That years ago during the Holocaust, she was part of a Christian family that was helping Jews escape while the Nazis were being murderous and all the just atrocities that were taking place in Germany at that time. And she herself, as a young girl, was arrested and placed in the concentration camps. And years later, after she had survived, people talked to her over and over again, how did you survive? How did you make it through when so many people didn't? And she talks about it because I knew who God created me to be. I knew what God had placed inside of me, that there was a confidence that even though you go through difficult circumstances, she realized God does not allow you to avoid the pain, but God allows you to stand strong in the midst of the pain. He allows you to survive the pain. That even though there are storms all around you, that he doesn't necessarily calm the storms, but he calms your heart in the midst of the storm. That is what we know. This is who I was meant to be. This is who we are. In 1 Peter 2:9, Peter's writing to just an ordinary group of people, right? He's not writing to leaders or other people. He's saying, you are chosen people. You are a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's very own possession. As a result, you can show others the goodness of God, for he has called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. And over in the Bible, we see that. When we say, well, how God has called you, he's spoken to you, he's designed you, he's equipped you. That no matter what your circumstances, no matter what your life, your skill set, no matter what your position in life, no matter what your personality, no matter how you're wired, all of those things, there are two things that we see from this verse, two things that we know are absolutely true about who you were created to be. The first is, you were created to be loved. Everyone in this room, you've got to understand the primary reason for you being created is so that you can be loved. It says God chose you. You're his chosen ones. He has knit you together. We live in a culture right now that I think is absolutely overwhelmed with attachment disorders. Now, there are specific attachment disorders that are probably as damaging as can be. We know with very young children that if they're not supported and cared for and loved at the youngest age, that there's damage that happens, that they don't have a capacity to form healthy relationships with any other person. And for many of them, almost their entire life. Like it's the most riveting thing for any human being to walk through. Because we need the stability of being loved. Do you understand that all of us, the reason we have stableness in our lives is because at one point someone loved us. Because at one point someone showed care to us, showed passion to us. And when we can understand that God loved us, the most stable force in the universe, the most stable creator in the universe, that he becomes our hope. He becomes our anchor. He becomes the one that anchors us and gives us purpose in everything that we do. It's kind of like playing catch. And you remember playing catch with little kids? How many, if you're playing catch with little kids, and normally when you're playing catch, it's like, hey, here's the ball, and then we toss it back. And we touch the ball, and we touch it back. And then you play with some little kid, and at some point, usually they go like this. They just throw it the other direction, and they just stand and they just watch. Do you know why they do that? Because they want to know if you will go pick it up and continue with them. They don't have the words at that point to put into practice, but what's taking place is, will you give up on me? When kids go through incredible detachment disorders as little kids, they push back and are angry and they fight and they're like, I'll hurt you first because I know eventually you won't get the ball and you won't come back and play with me. You won't play catch with me. But God, here's the beautiful thing about who God is we can be playing catch with God and something goes wrong in our lives and we take the ball and we go like this. Every single time, God goes and gets the ball and he comes back and he says, you want to keep going? It doesn't matter how many times you throw it in a different direction. He comes back and says, you want to keep going? You want to keep going? Because you can't shake his love. You can't shake his love. No matter what you've done or how many times, he doesn't give up on you. You can love people because you know you are always loved. The young man, I remember hearing him tell his story a while ago. His name is Josh Shipp, and Josh is one of these young boys that was raised in the foster care system. And as he was raised in the foster care system, he was bounced from home to home, and every home he went into, he would have his garbage bag full of his possessions. And in fact, he kept a journal of how long it took him to get kicked out of different homes, because he just knew it was going to happen. And so he tried to break records to see how quickly he could go. One day when he was dropped off at Rodney's house with his garbage bag over his shoulder, in his early teen years, took one look at Rodney. He's like, I'm going to break every record. And he started calling Rodney lowercase b, is what he'd call him, because of the shape of his body, right? Because just a big old belly, right? So he just called him, he's like, I'm just gonna pick on him, lowercase b, and we're just gonna make this easy. And he pushed and pushed. And every time he pushed, Rodney would just kind of just be there with him, and just talk to him, and it wouldn't rattle him. Finally, he got to the point where he stole a car and he's arrested. And so he calls Rodney from jail, lets him know where he's at. And he says, okay, you're down in jail. All right, well, enjoy the night. I'll see you tomorrow. And Josh at this point is convinced that this is going to be the time where he's done, that he's going to get to load up his bag and he's going to move on to the next house. And when he comes in to the house, he picks him up. They don't say anything in the car. When he walks into the house, all of a sudden there's this kind of a pause, and he's like, oh, I gotta go. He starts packing his stuff up in his bag, and Rodney's like, what are you doing? I'm packing my stuff up because you're kicking me out. And Rodney just looked at him in just a simple way, and he just says, boy, when are you going to get it through this thick head of yours that you are not a project to us? And he said for the first time in his life, he knew what love was. For the first time, he understood what it was meant to be loved. And it changed the whole framework of his life. Because all of us, to understand who we are, we have to know that we were created to be loved. And secondly, we have to know that we were created to bring life. We were created to bring life. How do we know what to bounce back into when difficult moments happen? It's because we are created to bring life. When you are loved, when you feel hurt or you feel wronged or you feel broken, what God says, to bounce back into the shape you were created to be, the best way that you can regain your shape is to show other people the goodness of God. Then in the midst of your pain, in the midst of your hurt, in the midst of the pressure you face, show people the goodness of God. And what most of us like to do is we like to show people religion and rules. Well, so let me show you religion and rules. And that's not, do you understand that Jesus never showed people religion and rules? God gave us boundaries, and boundaries are way different than rules. He gives us boundaries saying, hey, if you can run here, you're going to be amazing. You're going to be incredible. But he didn't give us religion and rules. He said, no, go give hope. Go give goodness. Go give love. Go give life. Over and over in the Bible, Jesus, when he was here, he talked about how we need to be people who serve other people, that we need to serve broken people, that we need to serve hurting people. And the reason that we do that, the reason he said you need to, even no matter how hurt you are, how broken you are, you need to go serve other people, is because that's where you will always find Jesus. You will always find him serving the broken, serving the hurting, helping other people, encouraging other people, giving them life. See, in life, we will either spend all of our days doing one of two things. We will either be a reflection of or a reaction to the people that are around us. We're either going to be a reflection of or a reaction to the people that are around us. I think it's time for so many of us to quit being a reaction to the people that are around us and start just reflecting Jesus. That if we could just reflect him, just reflect who he is, reflect his goodness, reflect his love, reflect his hope, to spend our time reflecting him, bringing life. What did Jesus do? He healed lepers. He spoke to women who were oppressed and overwhelmed. He fed hungry people. He forgave desperate people. Jesus constantly did that for the broken and the hurting. What better way for us to understand who God created us to be than to reflect him in those things? Right? To help us to know these things. So see, when you're up against the wall, when you feel like it's fourth quarter and you're running out of time and you don't know if you can understand the pressure, you don't know if you can understand the force, you don't understand if you can make it back in time, you feel flattened and broken, or you feel like a brick who's hard and rigid and you're just causing damage to others and to yourself, or you're so pliable that you don't know what to stand up for or who to do and people just run over you and you just kind of slip between people. Or do you, in those moments, be who who God created you to be and become the person that he meant for you to be, and to stand up in that moment and say, no, this is my shape. This is where I'm at. This shall not define me. He will define me. Like, real simply, when you feel out of shape and you feel the pressure, all you got to do, simple things, focus on Jesus. Look at who Jesus is. Focus on him. Allow his perspective. Get a healthy perspective on life and let everything else kind of fall into place, because he's the one that holds you. Not only that, just become a hope dealer. When you feel pressured, be a hope dealer. Start building healthy relationships. Give other people hope. Give other people encouragement. Give other people this sense of belonging, that they are cared for and loved. And then also ultimately keep stepping forward confidently. Don't allow the hesitation and the brokenness and the pain to keep you back. No, step forward. Remember, his mercies are new every morning. Every morning. That we have got the capacity to move forward and to see incredible things happen in our lives. One of the greatest moments in sports is kind of this little moment. It's a 30-second speech that took place in 2008. 2008, the Florida Gators were meant to be the undefeated team. They're coming off an incredible year. Tim Tebow was their quarterback. He had won the Heisman Trophy the year before, and they were expected to just sweep over everybody. In the very beginning of the season, they have a game against Ole Miss, and Ole Miss had different plans, and Ole Miss beat the highly rated and highly ranked Florida Gators. And at the end of that game, Tim Tebow's at the press conference, and Tim, if you've heard his story, he's one who understands who he is in Jesus. He's found Jesus in an incredibly profound way. And as he was answering questions, all of a sudden he just paused, took a deep breath, grabbed the podium, just looked out at the people that were there, and he just said this. He says, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I apologize to the fans and everyone who believed in us. But I will promise you one thing. A lot of good will come out of this. You will never see any player in the entire country play as hard as I will play the rest of the season. And you will never see someone push the rest of the team as hard as I will push everybody the rest of the season. And you will never see a team play harder than we will play the rest of the season. God bless. And he walked off the podium. From that moment on, it said that the team heard what he said. They took stock in it, and he was absolutely right. There was no team in the history of college football, for most prognosticators, that has ever played and like that team did. And it was so to the point where that 30-second speech is engraved and hung on the outside of the Florida Gator Stadium. It's there to this day, and will be there throughout history, because in that moment he's like, no, this loss does not define us. There is something else inside of us that defines us, that says who we are, that says who we will be. We will be resilient in this moment, and there is more to us. And here's what I want you to understand. You are more than a game. You are more than just a sporting event and a game that's played on a field. Your life is more important than any one of those circumstances or situations. Who you are, who God has created you to be. You have a Savior named Jesus who has come and has said you are loved and you have a purpose. That you will, no matter how much difficulty you're facing, he knows who you were created to be. He offers you hope and mercy every day. And with him by your side, you cannot be defeated. Like he's promised, you will not be defeated. So why would you respond to life with any less zeal than what a couple players did on a football field? To say that, no, this is the life I was created to be. Look at what in Ephesians chapter 2, Paul writes this. He says, but God is so rich in mercy, and he loved us so much that even though we were dead because of our sins, tell me there's not a lower level than that. Right? But he gave us life when he raised Christ from the dead. It is only by God's grace that you have been saved. Jesus, there is no better comeback story than what Jesus did on the cross. That he faced death and hell and the grave. And what did he do? He overcame it. If you think anything can stop you and you have Jesus on your side who overcame death, hell, and the grave, Come on, my friends. Like, there is something so much more that God wants for you, that God has for you, that he has in store for you, that there is a resiliency that you have been created for, that no matter how difficult, no matter how many pains that we have, you could face death but not be bent out of shape. Jesus faced death and was not broken. He faced death and he was not moved off of his mission. It did not change his love or his motivation or how he did things. Jesus is the greatest comeback story of all time. And as we think through what God has been doing, I want us just to ask you today, do you understand that he's reaching out to you? And in the midst of the brokenness of this world, in the midst of the hardship and the trouble, that we are pressed on every side by troubles, but we are not crushed. We are perplexed, but not driven to despair. We are hunted down, but never abandoned by God. We get knocked down, but we are not destroyed. Why? Because Jesus loves us and cares for us. The creator of the universe has created us for a purpose. He's reaching out to you today and he's just asking, will you be loved? And will you bring life? For some of you today is a day where we can be a day of a new beginning. All Jesus says is to surrender to him. Allow him to be the one who shapes your life. You don't need to be a brick and try to force your way through. You don't need to be pliable and just kind of blend in the background and let other people run over you. You don't need to be broken and flattened and try to rebuild. No matter how much pressure is placed on you, who God has created you to be, he's always determined that that's who you are.